So let me take you back nearly 2 decades. 2 decades ago, I was still in a normal job, for want of a better word, but I had this dream of trading on Betfair for a living. And it took a few steps to get to that particular point, but let me tell you about my first year of trading on Betfair. Please like and comment on the video below. That will allow me to produce better quality videos and more of them in the future. If you're interested in learning to trade successfully on sports, then why not visit the BetAngel Academy, where we have more detailed videos. So in a previous video I had talked about, were you interested in my first year on Betfair? So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, and I'm going to show you or give you some insight into stuff that was going on around that time and how things evolved from there. Now, it's important to remember that the first year that I had on Betfair will probably be very different from yours, because betting exchanges weren't very well known, strategies weren't very well known, there was no software, and there were all sorts of other mitigating factors as well. If you start trading now, you're going to be several steps up, because there's information available, there's liquidity on the exchanges, there's software available, there's quite a few strategies and tactics out there, although some of them I do question. But you're several steps on. However, the sort of experience that you'll go through will probably be similar to the one that I went through. I made the leap out of a normal job into trading full-time at a time when nobody did that, and everybody thought I was completely crazy. However, I obviously had the foresight to be able to sort of get involved and to give it a good go. But let me talk you through the experience of what happened, how I did, and how things sort of evolved from there. So necessarily the first place you have to start is with the launch of Betfair. You could actually wind back prior to the launch, because my interest in betting exchanges came around from being involved with an internet company, an internet service provider. I was involved with an internet service provider in the mid-90s. I'd been messing around on Prestel, then CompuServe, and then the internet for a large number of years, and I could see what was about to happen with the internet. And throughout my life, I'd been quite good at catching these waves, and repeatedly I'd been looking at technology and advances and trying to get involved with them at early stages. However, and even with the internet service provider, it's not that easy. Having a good idea is one thing, actually doing something about it is another, and making it a success is something completely different altogether. So the internet service provider could see what the internet was, tick, knew all about it, tick, understood the technology, tick, but the picking the right company, cross, doing it at the right time, cross, making it work, cross. It didn't work out for me, unfortunately. However, everything that you do will catapult you forward, probably in ways that you don't understand. So my involvement with internet-related stuff allowed me to merge that into other knowledge that I had in previous jobs and push myself in the direction of dealing with companies that were involved with the internet. And part of that was going around looking at technologies that were developing. And of course, one of those emergent technologies was peer-to-peer networks, and one of those peer-to-peer networks was the betting exchange. So I knew about betting exchanges before they had even been created. But when the betting exchanges came online, I joined up with them immediately, and that was how I got started. I was the early adopter. Betfair opened for business on the 7th of the 6th. I have covered this in some other videos, but they did a press release talking about the death of the bookie and how peer-to-peer technology was going to replace the bookie. If you look at all of the technology that's out there across the internet, that's more or less what it's done. It's sort of collapsed the old model of having loads of intermediaries into you and the company. And basically the proposition was that's what was going to happen to the betting market. So yeah, Betfair opened for business on the 7th of 6th, or that's when they officially launched. And it took me precisely 11 days to set up an account with them. So, but the thing is, think about this as well. It wasn't just Betfair that I set up my account with. I set them up with just about everybody that had the word internet on it. Or in those days, they used to prefix everything with an E. It was E something, E whatever. So, yeah, I basically joined up to all these services. I had no idea who the winner was going to be at that particular point in time, but I signed up to all of them. And when you look back, I mean, actually I preferred, there was a platform out there called Flutter. And the concept of flutter was you actually communicate with the person that you're placing the bet. So you'd place a bet up on England, and you'd sort of say, England going to absolutely, crush their opponents today. And then somebody would place the counter bet, but they'd put a little note on there going, no, they're not, Spain are far too strong or something. And then those two bets would get matched, and you would exchange a little note with it as well. And I quite liked that. That added a little bit of something to the bet that you were placing. However, you had Flutter and you had Betfair. Both of them were quite big at that particular moment in time, but Betfair took over Flutter. I think technically it was a merger, but like with a lot of mergers, you tend to have a bigger partner, and the bigger partner was Betfair. So that was probably one of the most strategically important things that happened early on in the industry, was Betfair taking out Flutter. Betfair went off and raised money, got some additional funding, and it was that they used to buy Flutter. And you find that a lot with startups, that if you have more funding than your opponent, then you can either take them out or out-compete them. That's what happened very early on within the betting exchange industry. There were hundreds of these models, and then they all started to sort of consolidate back into a smaller number. And some of them had a bumpy path and some of them didn't. So yeah, there were many, many, many around at that particular moment in time, and what you see now in the market are the survivors, because of all the hundreds that started. Gradually over time, lots have gone out of business, merged, closed, whatever, and what you see now are the winners in that very long attritional game. So yeah, I preferred Flutter, but where I started really was with arbing. So when you look at arbing, you tend to, if you look at some of the early spreadsheets that I'd done, what I was doing was basically matching off positions on the exchange with bookmakers. And I was doing that on Flutter, I was doing it on Betfair, I was doing it on many different platforms across, everywhere that I could. And that was the most obvious place to start with me. And when we look at what I was doing around this particular period, it was pretty similar to what you see sort of with match betting, apart from, I was doing outright arbing. And one of the issues that you have with that is that very often you can find that there is risk involved within that, in terms of people not willing to take your bets, or amending terms or odds after the situation, or not paying out. That was one of the biggest problems I had when I was arbing, was bookmakers not paying out, or refusing to pay out, or delaying payments. Some things never change, do they? But it was really still a pipe dream. Back in 2000, I was doing all of this sort of work, arbing between different entities, but really seriously, was I thinking about, really going full time? Not particularly, because I had a decent job. And when you have a decent job and all of those things, and a young family, it's not something that you really think seriously about doing. It's a pipe dream. It's something that's up there, that you sort of think about, that could be possible if there was scale. But there wasn't even scale. There was no liquidity on the exchanges back then. So it was not really an opportunity. The only opportunity would have been to work for one of these companies and hope that they turned into a much bigger one. But as I've said before, even that carries quite a bit of risk. So the big breakthrough came really in 2001, when during the budget, Gordon Brown stood up and abolished betting duty. Because of the internet, a lot of bets were being taken away from the on-course activity and through established outlets, and a lot of them were going offshore to avoid betting duties. So as a consequence, there was a mismatch in the market. The Chancellor at that time decided to address that mismatch and abolished betting duty. So that, for me, was a big shout out to the fact that there was a lot of potential from this particular period going on. And also, when you look at the growth the exchanges were seeing, you could see that there was potential to go there. Now, there's an important lesson for you here, because it doesn't matter what you do at any point in your life, there are always going to be risks attached, and it's natural for you and for your mind, the psychology behind it, to fear change and to fear big changes. So leaving a job to do this full time is a massive commitment, and also it carries risks as well. But one of the things that I've learned over time is that very often not doing something carries more risk, and has longer term consequences that are more negative. So it's more important to put that into perspective. People often focus too much on the negative and forget the positive. And around this time, I was maturing within my career, And I'd basically started at a very low level in my career and gradually worked my way up and up and up to bigger and bigger levels. And I was getting pretty well paid for doing that job. Bear in mind, this is 20 odd years ago. We're talking early 2000s here. I was getting paid particularly well for the job that I was doing, although the job itself was quite a tough job and involved a lot of things. So I wouldn't say that it was an easy job, but I'd sort of reached the point in my career that I felt I'd sort of pushed as far as I could, and for many years I'd always wanted to do my own thing. And I'd also, you would work for a company, you'd see an opportunity, you would help them exploit that opportunity, but then you would reflect and look back and you sort of think, well, I did most of that. I did a lot of work behind that. I created the opportunity, and you end up with that feeling that you're always doing that for somebody else. And I began to lose the fear for going out and trying something on my own. I just needed an opportunity to really go for it full time. And it turned out that because of all of those things reaching a point at that particular moment in time, that opportunity was Betfair, bizarrely. But of course, everybody thought that that was, just the silliest thing that they'd ever heard. And of course, nobody had ever done this before. It was going to be a really big jump at this particular point in my career. I had a young family. I was getting paid particularly well. And there I was going to abandon it all for something that seemed absolutely ludicrous at the time to absolutely everybody. There was very few people that could understand what I was going on about. So yeah, I made that big jump and decided that I should go out and make a go of it. And I sort of thought that if it didn't work out, then because I'd held senior positions and stuff before, it probably wouldn't be a problem getting back into a role. And also I felt I needed to make a few life choices at that point, because when you do a big job, it sort of swallows up everything, absolutely everything, from dawn until dusk, almost 7 days a week. It's impossible to do a big job with a decent salary without having to throw all of that commitment behind it. But that's actually no different from working for yourself or running your own business. It really is no different, apart from you get a bit of autonomy, you live and die by your own decisions, you're not subject to internal politics, all of those things. And that's what was driving my decision, really, is I thought, if I'm going to do something, I really need to do something. All of these opportunities I've seen, all these companies I've worked for, all of the work that I've done, why, shouldn't I just give it a go myself? Why would I not do that? So I did do it. But the markets were still sort of relatively immature, and also my trading was pretty immature as well. So I had a small bank to start with. Because of my previous experience with football, I knew the football markets pretty well, felt that I could probably get a bit of an edge by doing something in football. So, football was one of the places that I started trading on. And that was okay, but nothing spectacular. I didn't have a particularly big bank. I started from pretty much zero. I think I initially funded my account with about £1,000. But yeah, I was working in those markets, doing small trades and teasing characteristics out of the market. You've got to remember now that those markets back then were nothing like the markets that you see now. They were quite immature, they weren't particularly liquid, and there was a lot of... I'm just trying to think how I would best summarise it. I'd probably say that they are nothing like they are now in terms of the way that they function and work. But the market's got much more competitive as time has gone on, but there's much more liquidity. So there are many more niches in the markets nowadays, and there weren't when I was around. There was 3 or 4 vanilla strategies that you could use, and you would have to do them to the best of your ability and see if you could squeeze some money out of the market. Now the funny thing is, I started writing about trading, and I was doing presentations at financial exhibitions around the 2004-2005 period. But when you look at a lot of the strategies that people talk about now, they come from that era. There's been very little original content that I've seen in the last few years that tells me that there are people out there that are being particularly progressive, because I recognise a lot of what I was saying in 2004-2005 in videos, articles that I see nowadays, which is quite weird, really, because obviously over that period of time I've developed, progressed and matured. And the interesting thing is, have a look at how it changes in terms of the way that I have progressed over a period of time. So when you look at some of the early trades that I've done, you sort of see a bit of everything. There's a bit of horse racing, and as I've said in some previous videos, I used to do a lot in financial markets. I did a lot of financial market trading when I first went full time, and that was to see, you know, I sort of hedged my bets a bit, for want of a better word. I was doing a bit of writing for a financial magazine, I was doing a bit of trading on financials, and I was also doing the Betfair trading stuff as well. But the interesting thing is, because of my link between the two, if you look at those P&Ls around that period, you will find that there are financial markets P&Ls within there. And the interesting and curious thing about that is watch how it changes, because there's a little bit of racing, there's some football in there, and then there's financial markets trading. But if we then move forward a little bit, then you can see that more racing is coming into the mix. So why was it that I got interested in racing? I knew nothing about racing, I had no specialist knowledge, but the market was absolutely huge. It was billions, and all of the other markets I was in, like the financials, were really not doing a great deal of money. I mean, if you look at a detailed ledger that I kept for my financial market trading stuff on Betfair, you'll see that I was still doing quite a lot of money. You know, there's about £200,000 staked through that particular market. It's profitable. You can see that I'm measuring various different aspects of the market and the way that I'm actively trading it. You could probably pick out the sort of strategy that I was using there. But the problem with that market is it didn't really grow, and I kept looking at racing, and racing was constantly in front of me on the markets. That's obviously where a lot of money was bet, and the markets are absolutely huge. So I knew that I had to get involved with racing. So, you know, wind forward a couple of years later, and you can see that my P&L on that day, there was no football, there was no financial stuff, it was all racing. Because I knew if I sussed racing and I could effectively trade racing, which was the biggest market by far, then I would be able to make a living just doing that, just by effectively gambling on racing. So that was my motivation for moving into racing. Of course, now there are many different markets that you can pursue that have quite a lot of liquidity. Racing is still right up there, but there are plenty of markets that you can choose if you want to carve out a niche in that particular market. But what happened to me was, as I started to focus more and more on those particular markets, everything began to grow a little bit. But also my skill and knowledge within that market started to grow. So I went from this process of not making any money at all, and just dabbling around in the markets trying to figure out what on earth was going on with them, to getting a bit more knowledge, to being able to trade them more effectively. And then it was a case of generally becoming more consistent, but also, you know, you started to up the targets a bit. So, you know, first of all, it was like, just try and break even, try not to lose any money. Then it was a case of, I wonder if I can just squeeze £100 a day out of these markets. And then it was, when you break that barrier, it was like, I wonder if I could get 500. And then you think, I wonder if I can do 1,000 a day. But of course, you know, all of the targets mix and match and change and flop around depending upon what you're attempting to do and how you're attempting to do it and what stage of the career you're at, and whether it's your normal career or your trading career. That's all going to be different for every single person when you first start out trading. But I remember, you know, Adam Todd was posting P&Ls talking about doing 20,000 a year. And at that particular point, I was trying to get about 20 grand a month, because I thought, you know, how hard and far can I push this? How, you know, much can I lift this? What can I achieve? How can I achieve something special? I didn't want to just be able to trade. I wanted to do something special, something that somebody had never done before. And that's pretty much been my mantra all the way through my entire career, discovering new things, getting to grips with what I can see in front of me and trying to push the boundaries of what's possible as much as I possibly can. So, you know, when you look at the equity curve for my first year, you know, you could count my first year on Betfair as being any one of the things that I've talked about already. It could be when I first joined, in which case that would be quite a disappointing P&L. It could be from, you know, when I first went full-time, which would be a little bit better, or it could be when I started trading racing full-time. But I count the first year really as being when I decided to start doing it seriously, and when I'd left my job. Now, I don't have records for the first 24 weeks or so, or detailed records, because I was messing around effectively. But if you look at this equity curve that I'm about to put up, what you'll see is that for the first part of that year, I did about 16 grand. and then you can see the equity curve explode effectively upwards from there. And that was when I'd started to do trading a bit more seriously, and looking at racing and other sports and trying to bring in more things from the mix. But the interesting thing about the graph is this was just the start, because this was pre-BetAngel, and the more I traded and the more effort I threw into it, the more I could see what the potential opportunities were. I just needed a platform on which to do them. So this was just the start. If we wind the clock forward and start looking at when I was getting more sophisticated and I really had sussed what was going on with racing, and then throwing in BetAngel into the mix, then everything goes stratospheric from that particular point onwards, because then a whole range of strategies opened up to me and things just became generally that much bigger. So yeah, when I first started, I remember hedging my bets a little bit. I didn't have any preconception of what I wanted to do, but the only thing that drove me really was that I just left a really well-paid job, so I sure as hell needed to make up the income somehow. So that was a motivating factor for me when I first started. But really the first year was a case of me finding my feet, trying to do something consistently, and then sort of starting to build from there. But the interesting thing that I found was I'd always worried about what could go wrong prior to me making that leap. But in fact, what actually happened was when I actually sat down and started doing it, all these opportunities opened up in front of me. And then, of course, you throw BetAngel into the mix, and then suddenly even more opportunities opened up. So in hindsight, the thing that I was worried about the most was, it being a failure and this big leap being an absolute disaster. But what I hadn't thought about was the other side of the equation, all of the things that I would discover as soon as I started doing it seriously. And the fact is, when you do start doing something seriously and you throw a lot of energy and effort into it, then you'll really begin to find the true opportunity. Up until that point, there's no way that you can ever quantify it or write a nice little business plan that will tell you about it. It's only when you actually start doing it and start making progress towards those goals that you really begin to understand where the opportunity is. So anyway, hope that was interesting for you, but that's a reflection on my first year of Betfair trading and how I got there.